I am Simone, 34 years old, and up until this morning, I believed I was living the ultimate American dream in the heart of Atlanta. As the owner of a venture capital firm, I built my fortune from the ground up, careful to surround myself with people I could trust, or so I thought. After dropping my husband Julian at the airport for what he claimed was a critical business trip to Florida, my phone buzzed with a message from Mrs. Etta, the housekeeper, who has been like a second mother to me for 10 years. Her text was short, terrifying, and shattered my world in an instant. Do not go home. Park the car and check the living room cameras immediately. I pulled my Porsche over to the shoulder of the highway, my hands trembling as I opened the security app. I expected to see a burglar or a fire. Instead, I stood frozen as I watched the live feed. There was Julian, the man I had just kissed goodbye, walking into our master suite. He was not alone. He was popping a bottle of my $2,000 vintage wine and handing a glass to a woman I considered my little sister. As I watched them toast to my stupidity, I realized they were not just having an affair. They were drilling into my wall safe. Before I reveal exactly what I saw inside that safe and how I used their own greed to destroy them, please let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to smile while plotting the destruction of those who betrayed you. The betrayal did not start with that text message. It started hours earlier, in the hermetically sealed quiet of my car. I was driving Julian to Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport, navigating the notoriously brutal Atlanta traffic, while he checked his watch with a performance of anxious energy. He told me the investors in Miami were impatient, and that this deal could finally launch his sports consultancy firm into the stratosphere. I remember glancing over at him, admiring the way his tailored suit fit his broad shoulders, a remnant of his days as a college football star. I reached across the center console and squeezed his hand, reassuring him that he was going to crush the presentation. I was the supportive wife, the financial backbone of our marriage, and I had spent the entire previous night making sure he was perfect. I had packed his Louis Vuitton weekender bag myself, carefully folding his silk ties and ensuring his blood pressure medication was in the side pocket. I even slipped a surprise $500 gift card into his wallet so he could treat himself to a nice dinner after the meeting. I was so busy being the perfect partner that I missed the signs. When we pulled up to the departure terminal, Julian turned to me with a look of pure devotion. He leaned in his cologne, filling the car, and kissed me deeply. It was the kind of kiss that felt like a promise, a seal of loyalty that I foolishly believed in. "I love you, Simone," he whispered against my lips, his eyes crinkling in that charming way that had won me over 5 years ago. "I will call you the second I land in Miami." I watched him step out of the car, grab his bag, and stride confidently toward the automatic doors. I sat there for a moment watching his retreating figure, feeling a swell of pride for my ambitious husband. I drove away with a smile, already planning a celebratory dinner for his return. I had absolutely no idea that the moment he walked through those airport doors, he did not head to a security checkpoint. He circled right back to the taxi stand with a smirk on his face that I would only see later in high definition, heading straight back to my sanctuary to desecrate everything I had built. The drive back from Hartsfield-Jackson was usually a nightmare of brake lights and aggressive lane changes, but today, the gridlock felt distant. I merged onto the interstate and let out a long breath, the kind that expels weeks of accumulated tension. With Julian gone for 3 days, the house would be quiet. I could finally focus on the quarterly reports without interruptions, maybe even pour myself a glass of that expensive Riesling I had been saving, and order takeout from the Thai place Julian hated. For the first time in months, my shoulders dropped away from my ears. I turned up the volume on the stereo, letting the smooth bass of an old R&B track fill the leather-clad interior of the Cayenne. I felt invincible. I was a 34-year-old black woman running a multi-million-dollar empire, married to a former pro athlete, driving a car that cost more than my parents' first house. I had checked every box on the list of success. I was safe. Then the Bluetooth system interrupted the music with a sharp, jarring ring. The name on the dashboard display made me frown. "Mrs. Etta." My housekeeper never called me. We communicated exclusively through sticky notes and polite text messages about grocery lists or dry cleaning. In the 10 years she had managed my home, she had called me exactly once when a pipe burst in the guest bathroom. My stomach tightened with an instinctual dread as I pressed the answer button on the steering wheel. "Hello, Etta," I said, trying to keep my voice casual. "Is everything okay?" Silence greeted me. It was not the silence of a dropped call, but the heavy, terrified silence of someone holding their breath. Miss Simone, her voice finally came through, but it was unrecognizable. It was a whisper, trembling and thick with fear. "Where are you right now?" The question was sharp, urgent. I checked my mirrors. "I am just passing the exit for Buckhead." "What is wrong, Etta? Is the house on fire? Did the alarm go off?" "Do not come home." The command was so abrupt it felt like a physical blow. "I need you to listen to me very carefully. Pull the car over. Right now. Do not drive another mile." My heart began to hammer against my ribs, a frantic rhythm that drowned out the traffic noise. My mind raced through catastrophic scenarios: burglars, a gas leak, police. I signaled and swerved onto the emergency shoulder gravel, crunching loudly under my tires as I slammed on the brakes. "I am stopped." "Etta," I said, my grip on the steering wheel turning my knuckles white. "Tell me what is happening." "I am hiding in the pantry," she whispered, and I could hear tears in her voice. "I need you to open your security app. Look at the living room camera. Just look. And please, Miss Simone, do not scream." The line went dead. I sat there for a moment, the hazard lights clicking in the silence, the air conditioning suddenly feeling freezing against my skin. My hands shook so badly, I dropped my phone twice before I could unlock it. I did not want to look. I wanted to turn the car around and drive back to the airport. I wanted to go back to 5 minutes ago when my life was perfect. But I tapped the icon. The screen loaded the little spinning wheel, mocking my anxiety, until the live feed finally snapped into focus. The high-definition video feed loaded on my phone screen, presenting a picture so sharp it felt like a hallucination. There was no airport terminal, no security lines, and no departure gate. Instead, I was looking at the interior of my own sunken living room, bathed in the soft afternoon light, filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows I had paid to install last year. Standing in the center of the room, looking more relaxed than I had seen him in months, was Julian. He had already discarded the suit jacket I had brushed lint from an hour ago, tossing it carelessly onto the pristine white boucle sofa. He was not rushing to a meeting, he was home. But the true horror was not just his presence, it was who walked into the frame to join him. Chantel, my aunt's foster daughter. The girl I had treated like a little sister for over a decade. I had paid for her college tuition, bought her first car, and wiped out her credit card debt twice. Now she was sashaying across my Persian rug, wearing one of my silk kimonos, the limited edition one I bought in Kyoto. She looked entirely too comfortable, moving through my space with an air of ownership that made my stomach churn. She was holding 2 crystal glasses, and as she set them down on the marble coffee table, my eyes zeroed in on the bottle sitting next to them. It was a 1996 Chateau Margaux, a bottle worth $2,000 that I had been saving for a major company exit or our 10-year anniversary. They had popped the cork like it was cheap juice. I turned up the volume on my phone, pressing the device against my ear to catch every word over the hum of the highway traffic outside. The audio feed crackled slightly before Julian's voice came through, loud and mocking. "To the Queen of Capital," he sneered, raising the crystal glass in a sarcastic toast to the empty room. "May she stay blind and busy while we enjoy the fruits of her labor." Chantel giggled, a sound that used to strike me as innocent, but now sounded malicious and sharp. "Did she suspect anything at the drop-off?" she asked, hopping up to sit on the edge of my granite kitchen island, her legs swinging playfully. "Please," Julian scoffed, taking a long, greedy sip of the vintage wine. "Simone is so obsessed with being the perfect, supportive wife that she sees exactly what she wants to see. I told her the Miami investors were sharks, and she practically packed my bag for me. She is probably driving home right now, feeling proud of her hard-working husband. He stepped between her legs, leaning in to kiss her with a familiarity that made bile rise in my throat. It was not a tentative first kiss. It was practiced. Routine. They were not just stealing my wine, they were laughing at my trust, dissecting my naivety, while standing in the sanctuary I built for us. I watched in frozen silence as they clinked glasses again, celebrating my deception. I wanted to scream to drive back and burn the house down, but I forced myself to keep watching. I needed to see everything. Just when I thought my heart could not break any further, the heavy oak front door swung open without a knock. Into the frame walked Tiffany, my brother-in-law Trey's wife. If Chantel was the distraction, Tiffany was the demolition crew. She breezed into my sanctuary wearing a pair of sharp, mud-flecked stilettos, and my breath hitched as she stepped directly onto the antique Persian silk rug I had imported from Isfahan. We had a strict no-shoes policy in my house, a rule Tiffany had followed for 5 years with a tight, condescending smile. But today, with me supposedly hundreds of miles away, she ground her heels into the delicate fibers with a deliberate, casual disrespect that made my blood boil hotter than the affair itself. She did not look at Julian or Chantel with surprise. She looked at them with impatience. She bypassed the pleasantries entirely. "Cut the party short, you two," she snapped, her voice tinny but clear through the audio feed. "We are on a clock. Julian, tell me you found the wall safe behind the abstract painting. We need that ledger before she gets back." My grip on the phone tightened so hard I thought the screen might crack. Ledger. The word echoed in the silent car. They were not just looking for cash or jewelry. They were hunting for the blue leather-bound book where I kept the offline access codes to my offshore accounts and the master keys to my blind trusts. This was not a crime of passion. It was a corporate raid disguised as a family gathering. Tiffany walked over to the mantel, picking up a framed photo of me receiving my Businesswoman of the Year award. She looked at it with a sneer that twisted her pale features into something ugly. "God, she is so smug," Tiffany muttered, tossing the frame face down onto the hard stone of the fireplace. "She thinks she is untouchable because she writes the checks. Once we have those codes, we will see how high and mighty she acts when she is bankrupt." She turned back to Julian, her hands on her hips. "Stop drinking the profits and start drilling. If we do not transfer those assets by Monday, my debt collectors are going to start breaking legs, and I am not losing my knees for your incompetence." The puzzle pieces slammed together in my mind. Tiffany's sudden interest in my business trips, Julian's questions about my password security updates last week, Chantel's conveniently timed visits. They were all in on it. I sat back against the headrest, the initial shock dissolving into a cold, hard clarity. They thought they were robbing a helpless wife. They had no idea they were declaring war on a woman who negotiates hostile takeovers for a living. I watched Tiffany kick a cushion off my sofa, and for the first time in an hour, I stopped trembling. I reached for my other phone, the encrypted work line. It was time to stop being the victim and start being the CEO. The audio quality on the surveillance feed was crystal clear, capturing every syllable of the conspiracy being hatched in my living room. Tiffany stopped pacing and leaned over the coffee table, her face twisted with a venomous expression that she usually hid behind polite smiles at family gatherings. She looked directly at Julian, who was pouring himself another glass of my wine, and delivered a line that froze the blood in my veins. "Does that black bitch really think she is smarter than us, just because she has an MBA and a corner office?" The slur hung in the air, ugly and raw. For 5 years, Tiffany had played the role of the sweet, well-meaning sister-in-law who just wanted to learn about our culture. Now the mask was off. She did not just hate me because I was rich. She hated me because I was a black woman who had achieved the success she felt entitled to by birthright. Julian did not defend me. He did not even flinch. Instead, he laughed, a weak, pathetic sound that signaled his complete submission to her cruelty. "She got lucky with a few tech startups," Julian mumbled, swirling the dark red liquid in his glass. She thinks she is a genius, but she is just an ATM with an attitude. I watched as Chantel chimed in, resting a hand on her stomach. Well, this ATM is about to pay out a lot more. Once we announce the baby, Mama Lucille will make sure Simone feels so guilty about being barren that she will sign over half the estate just to keep the family name intact. We will guilt her into setting up a trust fund for the child, and we will drain it before the kid is even born. So that was the emotional leverage. They planned to weaponize my infertility, a pain I had confided in Julian during our darkest nights, to force a settlement. But Tiffany had bigger plans than just a divorce payout. She pulled a folded blueprint from her purse and slapped it onto the table. "Forget the trust fund for a second," she hissed. "We need that ledger to access her blind accounts. My investors in Miami are getting impatient. We need to funnel $3 million through her real estate company by Friday. If we do not wash that cash through a legitimate business, I am dead and so are you." My heart hammered against my ribs. This was not just about stealing my money. Tiffany was trying to use my firm, my reputation, and my clean financial record to launder money for criminals. She wanted to turn my life's work into a washing machine for dirty cash, likely from the illegal gambling ring her husband Trey was rumored to be involved with. If they succeeded, I would not just be broke. I would be in federal prison for racketeering and fraud. I watched Julian nod, his greed overriding any sense of self-preservation. "Do not worry," he said. "I saw her put the ledger in the floor safe in the library last month. The combination is her birthday." I sat back in the driver's seat, the initial shock replaced by a cold, calculating rage. They thought they were the predators circling a wounded gazelle. They had no idea that by revealing their hand so early, they had just given me the ammunition to bury them. I was not going to go home and scream. I was not going to call the police, not yet. I was going to let them think they had won. I reached for my phone and dialed my head of IT security. I needed to ensure that when they opened that safe, they found exactly what I wanted them to find. The game had just changed from a divorce to a federal investigation, and I was going to be the one holding the gavel. I pressed the power button on the side of my phone, turning the screen black and cutting off the sound of my husband plotting my financial ruin. Silence rushed back into the car, heavy and suffocating, but the chaos that had been raging inside my chest a moment ago vanished. It was replaced by a singular cold focus. A younger, weaker version of me might have burst into tears. She might have slammed her foot on the gas pedal, sped home, and screamed at them until her throat bled. But I was not that woman anymore. I was a CEO who managed high-stakes mergers and hostile takeovers for breakfast. Crying would ruin my makeup and screaming would tip my hand. Tiffany wanted a war. She wanted to play dirty. What she failed to realize was that she had just brought a knife to a drone strike. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of leather and expensive perfume, centering myself. The hurt was there, buried deep under layers of adrenaline, but I shoved it into a mental box and locked it tight. Right now, Julian was not my husband, and Chantel was not my sister. They were hostile entities attempting a corporate takeover, and I knew exactly how to dismantle hostile entities. I picked up my encrypted work phone, the one Julian did not know existed, and dialed the number that struck fear into the hearts of boardrooms across Atlanta. "Evelyn Vance, my shark of a lawyer." She answered on the second ring. "Simone, it is Sunday. This better be good. It is better than good, Evelyn," I said, my voice steady and completely devoid of emotion. "It is a RICO case wrapped in a divorce settlement. I need you to open a new file, code name Black Widow." I gave her the bullet points in rapid-fire succession. Money laundering, fraud, conspiracy, attempted grand larceny. I could hear the sound of her mechanical keyboard clacking furiously on the other end. "Do not file anything yet," I instructed. "I need 48 hours to gather the evidence that will put them away for 20 years. Next was David, my head of cybersecurity. He usually handled corporate espionage, but today, domestic terrorism seemed to fall under his purview. "David Weiss, need full surveillance on my residence, audio, video, and digital keystroke logging. Do not, I repeat, Do not lock them out of the system. I want you to create a sandbox environment. Let them think they have bypassed the firewall. Let them think they are accessing the offshore accounts, but route every single click, every transfer attempt to a dummy server. David hesitated. Simone, if they are trying to move millions, it is risky. We should shut down the ports. No, I commanded, my voice cutting through the air like a lash. If we stop them now, it is just attempted theft. I need them to execute the transaction. I need the digital fingerprint of a federal crime. Give them enough rope to hang themselves, David. Record every second. I want to see their faces when they think they have successfully stolen my empire. I hung up the phone and checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. My lipstick was perfect. My eyes were dry. I put the Porsche back into drive and merged onto the highway. But I did not head home. If they wanted to play house in my mansion, I would let them. I had a hotel to check into, and a master plan to finalize. The mourning period for my marriage was cancelled. The demolition phase had just begun. I spent 48 hours in a hotel room across town, monitoring their every move, watching them treat my home like a frat house, while I gathered the digital evidence that would eventually hang them. But the observation phase was over. It was time for the performance of a lifetime. I pulled into the driveway just as the sun was setting, casting long, dramatic shadows over the manicured lawn that Julian never lifted a finger to maintain. I did not sneak in. I did not creep through the back door like a thief in the night. I walked through the front entrance with the audible click of my heels on the marble foyer, announcing my arrival like a gavel striking a judge's bench. The smell hit me first. It was the rich, savory aroma of Creole spices. Mrs. Etta's signature seafood gumbo. They had forced my poor housekeeper to cook a romantic dinner for them like they were the lords of the manor. I walked into the formal dining room and found them seated at the head of the table. The intimacy of the scene was nauseating. Candlelight flickered between them, casting a soft glow on the crystal stemware. Chantel was laughing at something Julian said, her hand resting casually on his forearm. It was a domestic tableau that belonged to a happy couple, stolen and repurposed by two parasites. The moment I stepped into the archway, the laughter died instantly. It was as if I had sucked the oxygen out of the room. Julian dropped his fork. It clattered against the fine china with a sound that echoed like a gunshot in the sudden silence. His face went from flushed and happy to an ashen gray in less than a second. Chantel snatched her hand back as if she had been burned, nearly knocking over her water glass in her haste to create distance between them. I stood there smiling, the bright, dazzling smile of a woman who had just closed $1 million deal, not a woman who was about to orchestrate a systematic execution. Surprise, I chimed, dropping my briefcase on the sideboard with a heavy, deliberate thud. The conference ended early. The partners were so impressed with my proposal that we wrapped up 2 days ahead of schedule. I walked over to Julian, who was still frozen in his chair, his mouth slightly agape. I leaned down and kissed him on the cheek, lingering just long enough to smell the fear radiating off him. He smelled like sweat and desperation. I missed you so much, baby. How was Florida? Did you crush that presentation? Julian scrambled to stand up, wiping his mouth with a napkin, his eyes darting around the room as if looking for a hidden exit. Florida, he stammered, his voice cracking like a teenager's. Right. Florida. It was intense. The investors were tough, Simone. Really tough. But I think I got through to them. I just got back a few hours ago myself. I was so exhausted I just collapsed. I looked him dead in the eye. I knew he had not left the zip code. I knew his passport was in the safe I had emptied days ago. I knew he had spent the last 2 days drilling into my wall, not pitching to investors. Oh, you poor thing. I cooed, smoothing the lapel of his shirt with a loving touch that made him flinch. You must be drained. It is a good thing Chantel is here to keep you company. I turned my gaze to her. She looked like a deer caught in high beams, terrified and small. I kept my smile plastered on sharp enough to cut glass. Eat up, everyone. We have a lot to celebrate tonight. I took a slow, deliberate spoonful of the spicy seafood gumbo, allowing the silence to stretch until it became uncomfortable. Julian was watching me with the intensity of a man on trial waiting for the verdict. He had barely touched his food. Every time I reached for my water glass or shifted in my chair, he flinched, expecting an accusation. It was pathetic, really. This was the man I had relied on, the man I thought was my partner, and he was crumbling under the weight of his own guilt before I had even played my first card. I decided it was time to give him a little room to breathe just so I could tighten the noose later. I set my spoon down and sighed loudly, picking up my phone and frowning at the screen with feigned annoyance. "Remind me to fire the security company first thing Monday morning," I said casually, tossing the phone onto the table face up. Julian stiffened his eyes, darting to the device. "Why, what is wrong with them?" he asked, his voice tight. I shook my head in frustration. Apparently, the main server went down about an hour after I left for the airport. I have not been able to access the live feed for 2 days. The app just keeps showing a black screen. I am paying them thousands a month for peace of mind, and the one time I go away, the entire system crashes. It is completely unacceptable. The transformation in Julian was instant and visceral. It was as if I had physically removed 100-pound weight from his shoulders. He exhaled a long, shaky breath, and the color rushed back into his cheeks. He exchanged a quick, covert glance with Chantel, who immediately relaxed her grip on the tablecloth. "Oh, wow. That is terrible, babe," he said, and this time his voice sounded almost normal. "But hey, at least nothing happened, right? The house is still standing. Maybe it was just a glitch. I can take a look at the wiring in the study later if you want, just to see if I can reset it for you." I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing. Of course he wanted to look at the wiring. He wanted to make sure the blackout was permanent so he and Tiffany could finish drilling into my safe without paranoia. He thought he had gotten away with it. He thought the universe had conspired to protect his treachery. He had absolutely no idea that the system crash was manual. I had instructed David to kill the main feeds the moment I saw Tiffany enter the house. What Julian did not know was that while the obvious blinking cameras in the corners of the room were dead, the new system was very much alive. 2 weeks ago, I had David install military-grade pinhole cameras inside the eyes of the antique African masks hanging in the hallway, and within the smoke detectors in every single room, including the bathrooms. They were undetectable recording in 4K resolution with sensitive microphones that could pick up a whisper from across the room. I was not blind. I was seeing everything from angles he did not even know existed. "That is sweet of you, honey," I said, reaching across the table to pat his hand. "But do not worry about it. I will handle it next week. Let us just enjoy our dinner." I watched him take a large, enthusiastic bite of his gumbo, his appetite suddenly restored by his false sense of security. He thought the house was blind. He had no idea that the walls were watching him breathe, and I was recording every single lie that fell out of his mouth. Sunday arrived with the deceptive promise of sunshine and hickory smoke. I was hosting the family barbecue, a tradition I had bankrolled for 5 years, covering everything from the Wagyu beef burgers to the open bar. From the outside, it looked like a scene from a magazine, with Julian manning the grill and laughing with his cousins playing the role of the devoted patriarch. But inside my chest, a cold war was raging. I stood by the patio doors watching them congregate like vultures in linen shirts, waiting for the inevitable strike. It did not take long. Tiffany arrived late, carrying a large plastic bowl covered in aluminum foil, as if she were bearing a holy offering. She marched straight past the catering staff I had hired and set the bowl down in the center of the buffet table, right next to Mrs. Etta's legendary collard greens. I watched her unwrap it with a flourish. It was potato salad, or at least a tragic interpretation of it. The mixture was pale and watery, but the real offense was the dark, shriveled specks dotted throughout the mound. Raisins. She had put raisins in the potato salad. In the world of soul food, this was not just a culinary mistake, it was an act of cultural vandalism. Tiffany looked up, caught my eye, and smiled that tight, weaponized smile. "Simone, you have to try this," she announced, her voice pitching up loud enough to attract the attention of the entire patio. It is my grandmother's secret recipe. I made it especially for you because I know how much you appreciate authentic home cooking. She scooped a heavy dollop onto a paper plate and thrust it toward me. The smell of sweet mayonnaise and fruit wafted up, turning my stomach. No thank you, Tiffany, I said, keeping my tone polite but firm. I am saving my appetite for the ribs. I stepped back, but she stepped forward, invading my personal space. Come on, Simone, just one bite, she pressed, her eyes widening with feigned innocence. Unless you do not trust my cooking. Is that it? Do you think it is not good enough for your refined palate? I looked at the raisins, then at her. It is not about trust, Tiffany. I just do not eat raisins in my potato salad. It is a texture thing. I tried to walk away, but she dropped the plate. It hit the pavers with a wet splat, and instantly she dissolved into tears. Her hands flew to her face and her shoulders shook with exaggerated sobs. I knew it, she wailed, drawing every eye in the yard. You hate it because I made it. You have never accepted me. You make me feel so unwelcome in this family, Simone. Why are you so mean to me? Before I could even open my mouth to defend myself, Mama Lucille was there. She moved with surprising speed for a woman who claimed to need a cane, placing a protective arm around Tiffany's heaving shoulders. She turned her glare on me, her eyes filled with a contempt that had been simmering for years. Look what you did, Lucille spat, pointing a manicured finger at my chest. You upset her on purpose. You think just because you have that fancy office and these big gates that you are better than us. You are so high and mighty now that you cannot even eat a simple meal prepared with love. You have forgotten where you come from, Simone. You are a snob, and you are tearing this family apart. I stood there, surrounded by the silence of the guests, watching Julian pretend to be busy with the grill so he would not have to defend me. They wanted me to explode. They wanted the angry black woman to come out so they could justify their betrayal. Tiffany peeked through her fingers to see if I had cracked. I did not give them the satisfaction. I looked at the ruined salad on the ground, then at my mother-in-law. I have not forgotten anything, Lucille, I said calmly. I remember everything. I turned and walked back into the house, leaving them to comfort the arsonist while I checked the recording devices. They had just given me another layer of proof for the harassment suit. I retreated to the sanctuary of the air-conditioned living room, hoping for a moment of silence, but peace was a currency my in-laws refused to let me hoard. Barely 5 minutes had passed before Mama Lucille followed me inside, the heavy thud of her orthopedic cane against the hardwood floor, announcing her arrival like a war drum. She did not come alone. Tiffany trailed behind her, wiping dry tear tracks from her face, acting the part of the wounded dove seeking protection. Lucille blocked my path to the kitchen, her eyes narrowing as she looked me up and down, taking in my tailored linen trousers and silk blouse with open disdain. To her, my polished appearance was not a sign of success, it was a rejection of the struggle she believed defined black womanhood. You are hard, Simone Lucille declared, her voice dripping with judgment. That is your problem. You are cold and sharp like a piece of glass. Look at Tiffany. She is soft. She knows how to bend. She knows how to make a man feel like a man. You could learn a lot from her if you stopped looking down your nose at everyone. I stifled the urge to laugh. Learn from her. Learn how to ruin a potato salad, or how to manipulate a family into feeling sorry for you. But I kept my face impassive, knowing that any reaction would be used as ammunition. I am running a corporation, Lucille, I said, keeping my voice even. Softness does not close deals. Deals, Lucille scoffed, waving her hand dismissively, as if my career was a frivolous hobby. That is all you care about. Deals and dollars. But what are you doing for this family? You have all this money sitting in the bank gathering dust while your brother and sister are struggling to build their dreams. Julian tells me you just closed another round of funding. Millions, he said. And yet here is Tiffany with a brilliant business idea, and you will not even hear her out. So there it was, the ambush. The potato salad tears were just the opening act for the financial shakedown. I looked at Tiffany, who suddenly looked very interested in the ceiling. "What idea is that?" I asked, knowing exactly where this was going. "Tiffany wants to open a luxury medical spa," Lucille said, her chest puffing out with pride. "A place for healing. She has the vision, Simone, but she needs capital. We are family. It is your duty to lift her up. You should write the check today. Consider it an investment in the family legacy." I looked at Tiffany, who offered a shy, hopeful smile. A medical spa. This coming from a woman who once asked me if Botox was a type of mushroom. They did not want an investment. They wanted a donation. A massive, non-refundable transfer of wealth to fund a lifestyle Tiffany felt entitled to, simply by proximity. And the worst part was the way Lucille framed it. Not as a request, but as an obligation. As if my hard-earned money was communal property to be distributed to the least competent members of the tribe. "It is $100,000 to start?" Tiffany piped up, her voice small and wavering. Julian said, "That is basically pocket change for you." I felt a cold fury rise in my chest. Julian. My husband was discussing my liquidity with them, promising away my assets to buy their affection. Lucille stepped closer, tapping her cane on the floor for emphasis. "Do the right thing, Simone. Be a woman for once instead of a banker. Help your sister. Show Julian you can be generous. Maybe if you spent less time hoarding money and more time nurturing your family, God would bless you with a child of your own." The cruelty of her words hung in the air, breathless and toxic. She had weaponized my infertility to shame me into funding a scam. I looked at the two of them, the matriarch and the parasite, standing there with their hands out, expecting me to break, expecting me to pay for their approval. I smiled, but it did not reach my eyes. "Send me the business plan," I said coldly. "I will have my team review it." I walked away before they could see the shaking in my hands, not from sadness, but from the sheer effort of not evicting them from my house right then and there. They wanted money. I would give them something else entirely. Later that evening, the heavy oak door to our master suite slammed shut, sealing us inside. A silence that felt less like privacy and more like a cage. I was standing at the vanity, unclasping the diamond tennis bracelet I had bought for myself last Christmas, watching Julian in the mirror. He was pacing the length of the room, his hands agitated, his tie loosened just enough to look disheveled. I expected an apology for his mother's behavior, or perhaps an excuse for Tiffany's rudeness. Instead, Julian turned on his heel and pointed a finger at my reflection. "You really enjoyed that, didn't you?" he accused, his voice thick with misplaced righteous indignation. "You love making my family beg. It gives you a power trip to dangle your money over their heads like a carrot." I turned slowly, placing the bracelet in its velvet box with a deliberate click. "I did not make them beg, Julian. I asked for a business plan. That is standard procedure." "Standard procedure?" He laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. "That is your problem, Simone. Everything is a transaction to you. You treat your marriage like a merger, and your family like employees. Do you know how humiliating it is for me to stand there and watch my wife treat my mother like a stranger? I am the man of this house, but you make me feel like a guest." I leaned against the dresser, crossing my arms. "I am listening, Julian. Tell me how I have failed you." I wanted him to say it. I wanted it on the record. He took a step closer, invading my personal space, trying to use his physical size to intimidate me. "It is not just about the money, Simone. It is about us. When was the last time you looked at me the way you look at your quarterly earnings report? When was the last time you touched me without checking your schedule first? I am starving for affection, and you are freezing me out. You are so cold, so distant. It is like sleeping next to an iceberg." I watched his performance with a detached fascination. This was textbook gaslighting. He was rewriting history, painting himself as the neglected victim to justify his infidelity. He was sleeping with my foster sister, not because he was a cheater, but because I had forced him to seek warmth elsewhere. "That is why I spend time with Chantel," he said, dropping the name like a grenade. She listens to me, Simone. She does not judge me. She does not ask me about my ROI or my 5-year plan. She just asks how my day was. She makes me feel like a human being, like a man. Is it a crime for me to want to be around someone who actually likes me? My heart hammered against my ribs, but my face remained a mask of calm. He was admitting to the emotional affair, using it as a weapon to bludgeon me into submission. He wanted me to feel jealous, insecure, and desperate enough to buy his love back. He wanted me to apologize for working hard enough to pay for the roof over his head. I am sorry you feel that way, Julian, I said, my voice steady. I had no idea you were so unhappy. He softened instantly, thinking his manipulation had worked. He reached out, stroking my arm with the same hand that had held Chantel's waist hours ago. I just want us to be a team again, babe. Fix this. Help Tiffany. Show my mom you care. Prove to me that I still matter more to you than your bank account. He kissed my forehead, a gesture that made my skin crawl, and walked into the bathroom, leaving me alone in the bedroom. I waited until the water started running before I glanced up at the smoke detector, offering a small, cold smile to the lens hidden inside. He wanted proof of my commitment. I was compiling proof of his destruction. Tuesday morning was supposed to be the pinnacle of my fiscal quarter. I was sitting in the glass-walled conference room on the 45th floor, finalizing a $10 million seed round with a delegation of conservative Japanese investors. The air in the room was calibrated to a perfect stillness, broken only by the respectful rustle of contract pages and the hum of the city far below. I was in my element, commanding the room with a laser pointer and a projection of exponential growth charts. Then the chaos arrived. It did not start with a knock, but with a commotion in the outer lobby that grew loud enough to penetrate the soundproof glass. I paused mid-sentence, my laser pointer wavering slightly against the screen as the heavy double doors flew open. Julian burst into the room, his face flushed and his chest heaving. He was not wearing a suit. He was wearing a tracksuit, looking frantic and unprofessional, a stark contrast to the tailored precision of the men sitting around the table. Two of my security guards were right behind him, grabbing at his arms, but he shook them off with the brute strength of a former linebacker. I stood up slowly, my heart dropping into my stomach as the investors exchanged alarmed glances. "Julian," I said, my voice low and dangerous, "I am in a meeting. Get out." He ignored me. He ignored the clients. He marched straight to the head of the table, slamming his hands down on the polished mahogany surface. "You blocked my access!" he shouted, his voice cracking with manufactured outrage. "I went to the bank this morning to withdraw funds for the charity initiative, and they told me my signature is no longer valid on the trust. How dare you, Simone? How dare you lock me out of my own family's money while you sit here playing tycoon?" The room went dead silent. This was a calculated strike. By framing the withdrawal as a charity initiative, he made me look like a monster who was hoarding wealth from orphans. He was trying to shame me into compliance, betting that I would sign an authorization slip just to make him leave and save face. He wanted the access codes to the trust fund, the only liquidity I had left that he could not touch without my permission. I looked at the stunned investors, then at my husband. I did not yell. I did not debate him. I simply pressed the intercom button on the table. "Security to the conference room immediately. Escort Mr. Brooks out of the building and revoke his clearance badge." Julian's eyes bulged. "You cannot do that. I am your husband. You are financially abusing me, Simone. You are trying to control me with money because you cannot control me with love." He was screaming now, spitting the words as the guards finally secured a grip on him and began dragging him backward. He kicked over a potted plant on his way out, the ceramic pot shattering loudly against the floor, a physical manifestation of the damage he was doing to my professional reputation. As the doors closed, cutting off his shouts, I was left standing in the wreckage of my perfect meeting. I turned back to the investors, smoothing my skirt with a hand that I forced to remain steady. "I apologize for the disturbance, gentlemen. It seems my husband is under a great deal of stress. Shall we continue with page 14? I resumed the presentation, but I saw the look in their eyes. The respect was fractured. Julian had not just embarrassed me, he had cost me capital. As I pointed to the revenue chart, I made a mental note to add the cost of this lost deal to the debt he would be paying off for the rest of his miserable life. The gloves were officially off. Wednesday was supposed to be the day I regained my footing. I had arranged a power lunch at Le Bilboquet with Marcus Thorne, the CEO of a tech unicorn I had been courting for 6 months. Securing his portfolio would not only silence the whispers about my husband's outburst, but would also cement my firm's dominance for the next fiscal year. The lunch was flawless. We laughed over lobster salad, exchanged war stories about the market, and by the time the espresso arrived, Marcus was nodding in that specific way that meant he was ready to sign. I signaled the waiter for the check, feeling the familiar rush of a closed deal. I slid my black Centurion card into the leather folder, with a casual confidence, already calculating the commission in my head. 5 minutes later, the waiter returned. He did not make eye contact. He leaned down. His voice dropped to a discreet murmur that somehow sounded like a shout in the quiet restaurant. "I am terribly sorry, madame, but the card was declined." I frowned, assuming it was a chip error. "Try it again," I said, handing him my Platinum Reserve card instead. "The machine is probably just glitching." He walked away, but the tension at the table spiked. Marcus took a sip of water, his eyes shifting away from me. The waiter returned even faster this time, looking mortified. "Declined again, madam. The system says reported for suspicious activity. All cards associated with this social security number have been frozen." My blood ran cold. My credit score was perfect. I had millions in liquidity. This was not a banking error. This was Tiffany. She was a senior relationship manager at Sovereign Bank, the institution that held my personal accounts. She had access to the fraud alert system. She had flagged my spending as suspicious, freezing my assets remotely just to humiliate me in front of a client. I looked at Marcus, who was already reaching for his wallet, with a pitying smile. "Do not worry about it, Simone," he said, his tone dripping with condescension. "It happens. Let me get this." I felt the heat rise up my neck. If I let him pay, I lost the power dynamic. I lost the deal. "No," I said, my voice sharp. "Put your wallet away, Marcus." I pulled out my phone and called my assistant Chloe, who was holding down the fort at the office 3 blocks away. "Chloe, bring the emergency petty cash envelope to Le Bilboquet. Run!" 10 agonizing minutes passed. Marcus checked his watch twice. I sat there forcing small talk while inside I was envisioning Tiffany's smug face behind her bank teller screen. When Chloe finally burst in, breathless and clutching a thick envelope, I paid the $500 bill in cash, peeling off crisp hundreds like a drug dealer. I smoothed things over with Marcus, spinning a story about an identity theft breach I was resolving, but the damage was done. He signed the deal, but he looked at me differently. He saw chaos. As I walked out of the restaurant, I did not call the bank to complain. I called my lawyer. Tiffany had just violated the Federal Banking Privacy Act. She thought she was playing a prank. She had just handed me a felony charge to hang around her neck. The tension from the restaurant incident hung over the dining room table like a toxic fog, but Thursday night dinner was mandatory in the Brooks household. I sat at the head of the table picking at my roasted chicken while Julian poured wine for everyone except Chantel. I watched her closely. She had been pale all evening, pushing her food around her plate with a lethargy that was out of character for a girl who usually ate as if she were afraid the food would vanish. Suddenly, she dropped her fork. It clattered loudly against the china, and she clamped a hand over her mouth. Her eyes went wide, filled with a watery panic, and she shoved her chair back, sprinting toward the powder room. The sound of her retching echoed down the hallway, loud and unmistakable. Tiffany gasped, clasping her hands together in a theatrical display of shock. "Oh my God," she squealed, looking at Julian with wide, knowing eyes. "Is it true? Is she really?" Julian did not answer immediately. He sat back in his chair, a slow, arrogant grin spreading across his face. He looked like a king who had just conquered a new territory. When Chantel finally emerged from the bathroom, wiping her mouth with a paper towel, the room went silent. She looked at Julian, then at Mama Lucille, and finally let her gaze flicker nervously to me. "I am pregnant," she whispered, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and excitement. The explosion of joy was instantaneous and deafening. Mama Lucille threw her hands in the air, shouting praises to Jesus, as if she had just witnessed a resurrection. She struggled out of her chair, moving faster than I had ever seen her move, and pulled Chantel into a suffocating embrace. Tiffany was jumping up and down, clapping her hands like a seal. Finally, she shouted, "A baby! We are going to have a baby in the house!" In the middle of the chaos, Julian remained seated. He turned his head slowly and locked eyes with me. It was not a look of apology, it was a look of triumph. It was a stare that said, "Look at what she can do that you never could." He was throwing his fertility in my face, daring me to react, daring me to break down and cry over the one thing my money could not buy. Mama Lucille pulled back from Chantel, her face wet with tears of joy. She cupped the girl's face in her hands, ignoring the fact that Chantel was effectively her foster daughter, sleeping with her son. "This is it," Lucille declared, her voice booming with authority. "The Lord has answered my prayers. This is the heir. This is the grandson who will carry on the Brooks name." She turned to look at me, her eyes hardening into stones. "Finally, we have a real woman in this family who understands her duty. Simone, you should be happy. Since you could not give Julian a legacy, at least you can help pay for this one." I felt a sharp physical pain in my chest, the ghost of my own miscarriages rising up to choke me. But I swallowed it down. I looked at Julian's smug face, at Lucille's cruel delight, and at Chantel's terrified hand resting on her flat stomach. They thought this baby was their golden ticket. They thought this child secured their future and cemented my defeat. I took a sip of water to clear the dryness in my throat. "Congratulations," I said, my voice as dry as parchment. "A baby is always a blessing." I did not tell them that a blessing built on a foundation of lies is usually a curse in disguise. I did not tell them that I had already engaged a private investigator to look into Chantel's timeline. Let them celebrate. The higher they climbed on this mountain of delusion, the further they would fall. The applause died down, but the air in the dining room remained thick, with a nauseating mixture of triumph and cruelty. Mama Lucille sat back in her chair, folding her hands over her chest, like a judge delivering a sentence. She looked around the expansive dining room, taking in the crystal chandelier and the silk drapes that I had paid for with my bonus checks. Her eyes finally landed on me, and I knew the hammer was about to drop. "This apartment Chantel is renting is no place for a Brooks baby," she announced, her voice cutting through the silence. "It is drafty and small, and the neighborhood is questionable. No, my grandson will not be raised in squalor while his father lives in a palace." She turned her gaze to me, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Simone, you have 5 empty bedrooms upstairs doing absolutely nothing. It is a waste of space and a sin against family values. Chantel is moving in. Tonight." I started to open my mouth to protest, to point out the insanity of living with the woman carrying my husband's child, but Lucille raised her hand, silencing me instantly. "Do not be selfish, Simone. God did not bless your womb, but He blessed your bank account. It is your clear duty to provide the nest, since you could not provide the bird." The cruelty of her metaphor hung in the air. She was reducing my worth to a biological function and declaring me obsolete. "You cannot give Julian a son," she continued, her voice dripping with false piety. "So the very least you can do is give his son a roof. You have a responsibility to this bloodline, Simone, even if you did not contribute to it. Think of it as your way of making up for your deficiencies." Julian nodded eagerly, taking a sip of wine as if this was the most logical solution in the world. "Mom is right, babe," he said, avoiding my eyes. "It makes sense logistically. I want to be there for every kick and every ultrasound. I cannot do that if she is 40 minutes away in traffic. Plus, you are always working. Chantel can keep the house lively." I looked at Tiffany, who was smirking behind her napkin, enjoying the show. They were cornering me, using my own home as a weapon. The audacity was breathtaking. They were asking me to house my husband's mistress and their illegitimate child under my own roof, to pay for their food and listen to their laughter while I slept down the hall. My blood boiled hot enough to melt the silverware, but I forced my breathing to remain steady. I realized in that moment that pushing back would only make me look bitter. It would give them more ammunition to paint me as the villain. But if I brought Chantel into my web, I would have 24-hour surveillance on the woman who held the key to their destruction. If she moved in, she would be on my territory. She would be connected to my Wi-Fi. She would be speaking near my hidden microphones. I looked at Lucille, then at Chantel, who was watching me with a mixture of fear and defiance. "You are right, Mama Lucille," I said, my voice devoid of warmth, but loud enough to be recorded by the device in the flower arrangement. "Family comes first. I will have Mrs. Etta prepare the guest suite immediately. Welcome home, Chantel." I smiled, but inside I was already planning exactly how this house would become her prison. The moment the words left my mouth, the tension in the room broke, replaced by a wave of triumphant chatter that made my skin crawl. Mama Lucille banged her cane on the floor in approval, looking at me with the satisfied smirk of a general who had just forced the enemy to surrender. "See," she crowed, reaching for a second helping of cobbler. I knew there was a heart buried somewhere under all that ambition. Julian looked like he had just gotten away with murder, which in a way he had. He rushed over to hug me, his embrace suffocating and insincere. "You are the best, Simone," he whispered, smelling of wine and deceit. "I promise we will make this work." I pulled away gently, feigning a headache. "I am going to prepare the room," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I need a moment." I walked up the grand staircase, feeling their eyes on my back. To them, my slumped shoulders looked like defeat. In reality, I was hiding the predator's grin that was threatening to break through. I entered the guest suite, the one down the hall from the master bedroom, and began stripping the bed. Mrs. Etta followed me in, slamming the door behind her with uncharacteristic force. She looked at me with tears of rage in her eyes, her hands trembling as she grabbed the sheet from my hands. "Miss Simone, have you lost your mind?" she hissed, her voice low and fierce. "You cannot let that woman live here. You cannot let her parade that belly around your house while you pay the bills. I will not serve her, Simone. I will quit before I bring that homewrecker breakfast in bed." I watched the only person in this house who truly loved me unravel on my behalf. I took the sheet back from her, folding it with calm, precise movements. "Etta, listen to me," I said, stepping into her personal space and dropping my voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "I am not surrendering. I am hunting. If she is in an apartment across town, I have to guess what they are plotting. If she is here, sleeping in this bed, using this Wi-Fi, eating at my table, I will know everything." I pointed to the smoke detector above the bed, then to the innocuous-looking alarm clock on the nightstand. "There are eyes and ears in every corner of this room, Etta. I want to hear her snore. I want to hear every phone call she makes to Tiffany. Keep your enemies close, Etta. Right under your roof where you can watch them hang themselves." Mrs. Etta's expression shifted from anger to understanding, and finally to a grim satisfaction. She straightened her apron and nodded once, a silent pact sealed between us. Just then the doorbell rang. Julian had wasted no time. I went downstairs to greet my new house guest. Chantel stood in the foyer with 2 suitcases, looking around the high ceilings with greedy eyes. "Welcome home," I said, opening my arms wide. "I hope you are comfortable." I watched her walk up the stairs, unaware that she was not checking into a luxury hotel. She was checking into a surveillance state, and I was the warden. Living with Chantel was like hosting a parasite that had developed a sudden and expensive taste for Egyptian cotton sheets and organic pressed juice. She did not just move into the guest suite. She sprawled across the entire household with the entitlement of a queen in exile. Within 48 hours, the serene atmosphere of my home had been replaced by the chaotic energy of a frat house. She left wet towels on the mahogany furniture. She ordered pay-per-view movies on my account without asking. She treated Mrs. Etta not like the dignified household manager she was, but like a personal maid born to serve her whims. The breaking point for my patience came on Wednesday morning. I was in the kitchen reviewing a contract on my tablet when Chantel waddled in wearing one of my cashmere robes. She sat at the counter and pushed her half-finished smoothie away with a grimace. "Etta, this has pulp in it," she whined, her voice grating against the silence. "I specifically said no pulp. Do you want me to get sick? Do you want the baby to be stressed?" I watched Mrs. Etta's jaw tighten as she took the glass back without a word. My blood boiled. I wanted to drag Chantel out by her hair and throw her onto the street. But I forced myself to remain still. I took a sip of my black coffee and smiled. "She is just trying to help Chantel," I said, keeping my eyes on the screen. "Hormones make us sensitive to textures, right? I will make sure she strains it next time." Chantel smirked, satisfied that the lady of the house had bowed to her. She did not know that her rudeness was just adding fuel to the fire that would eventually consume her. I waited until that afternoon when Julian took her out for a prenatal massage that I had paid for. The house was finally quiet. I put on a pair of latex gloves and slipped into the guest suite. The room smelled of cloying vanilla perfume and stale snacks. It was a mess, but I ignored the clutter and headed straight for the ensuite bathroom. This was not a snooping mission. It was a harvest. I found her hairbrush lying on the marble vanity, clogged with strands of dark hair. I pulled a small Ziploc bag from my pocket. Using a pair of tweezers, I carefully extracted a clump of hair, ensuring the follicles were attached. This was the golden ticket, but I needed a backup. I opened the medicine cabinet and took her toothbrush, sealing it in a second bag. My heart was pounding, not from fear of getting caught, but from the thrill of the hunt. I slipped the bags into my blazer pocket and walked out of the room, leaving everything exactly as I found it. As I walked down the hallway, I could feel the plastic bags against my hip. They felt heavier than gold. Julian thought he was protecting his legacy. He had no idea that I was currently carrying the biological proof that would blow his legacy into dust. I went straight to my home office and called the private lab. I needed a rush order. The science was about to catch up with the lies. The silence of the house at 2 in the morning was usually my favorite time to work, but tonight, the glowing screen of my laptop felt like a portal into hell. The comprehensive report from my forensic accountant had arrived encrypted and password protected. I had spent the last hour dissecting the financial anatomy of my husband's betrayal, and what I found made the infidelity look like a minor infraction. I expected to see charges for hotel's jewelry, maybe a secret apartment. Instead, I was looking at a complex web of wire transfers that screamed federal indictment. Tiffany was not just a greedy sister-in-law with a taste for luxury. She was a criminal mastermind. The report detailed a series of deposits into Julian's Dormant Consulting LLC. They were structured deposits, always just under the $10,000 reporting threshold, coming from shell companies with vague names like Apex Logistics and Blue Sky Ventures. I cross-referenced these companies with the background check my investigator provided. They were fronts, laundromats for a mid-level drug syndicate operating out of East Atlanta. My breath hitched as I realized the scale of the operation. Tiffany was using Julian's accounts to clean dirty money. She would deposit the illicit cash, then invoice Julian for consulting fees from her position at the bank, effectively washing the funds and moving them into legitimate circulation. But here was the genius of her malice. Julian was the sole signatory on the LLC. Every single document, every falsified invoice, every digital footprint led back to him. Tiffany's name was nowhere. She had set him up to be the perfect fall guy. If the IRS or the FBI looked at this, they would see a washed-up athlete laundering drug money. They would not see the blonde relationship manager pulling the strings from behind a bank counter. Julian was not just going to lose his marriage. He was looking at 20 years in a federal penitentiary for racketeering and money laundering. He was so blinded by his desire to be the provider, the big man on campus, that he had signed his life away to a woman who viewed him as disposable collateral. I realized with a jolt of terror that if we had filed a joint tax return this year, I could have been implicated too. Tiffany had nearly dragged my clean empire into the mud with them. I sat back in my leather chair staring at the damning spreadsheets. A strange mix of pity and disgust washed over me. Julian was an idiot, a cheater, and a liar, but he was also a pawn. Tiffany was the queen on this chessboard. She planned to let him take the fall the moment the heat got too high while she walked away with the clean cash. I saved the files to an external drive and hid it in the hollow heel of my favorite stiletto. I now held the power to send my husband to prison or to save him just long enough to destroy the real villain. I closed the laptop feeling a new kind of resolve. I was not just fighting for my assets anymore. I was fighting to make sure the right person ended up in handcuffs. The game had just escalated from family court to criminal court, and I was the only one holding the gavel. The notification from the genetic testing laboratory arrived on my encrypted server at 3 in the morning, piercing the silence of my home office like a gunshot. I had been waiting for this email for 48 hours, pacing the hardwood floors while the house slept around me. Upstairs, Julian was likely dreaming of the dynasty he thought he was building, and Chantel was dreaming of the fortune she thought she had secured. I sat down at my desk, my hand hovering over the mouse, for a fraction of a second, savoring the anticipation. I knew whatever was in this PDF file would be the final nail in their collective coffin, but I was not prepared for the sheer magnitude of the destruction I was about to unleash. I clicked the file. The document opened and my eyes scanned immediately to the bottom of the first page. The words "paternity excluded" flashed on the screen in stark bold letters next to Julian's name. A 0% probability. My breath hissed out between my teeth. I knew it. I knew Julian's sudden fertility miracle was a biological impossibility after his medical history, but seeing the scientific proof felt like vindication. He was not the father. He was just the bankroll. But the lab had run the sample against the secondary reference I had provided, a discarded soda can I had swiped from Trey at the barbecue. I scrolled to page 2, and the world seemed to tilt on its axis. The probability of paternity for subject B, identified as Trey Brooks, was 99.9%. I froze, staring at the numbers until they blurred. Trey, Julian's younger brother, Tiffany's husband. The sheer incestuous toxicity of it was breathtaking. Chantel was not just sleeping with Julian, she was sleeping with both brothers, playing them against each other in a twisted game of musical chairs. Tiffany, the woman who walked around with her nose in the air, judging my marriage, was currently being cheated on by her own husband with the same woman she had planted in my house. A sound bubbled up in my throat, starting as a low hum and erupting into a loud, dark laugh that bounced off the walls of the office. It was not a laugh of joy. It was the terrifying sound of a woman who realizes she has just been handed a nuclear weapon. This result did not just ruin Julian. It destroyed everything. It meant that the heir Mama Lucille was praying for was actually an illegitimate child fathered by the husband of her favorite daughter-in-law. It meant that Tiffany's entire life was a lie. It meant that Julian had been cuckolded by his own flesh and blood. I leaned back in my chair, feeling a rush of adrenaline so potent it made my hands shake. I imagined the look on Tiffany's face when she found out. I imagined the look on Julian's face when he realized he was raising his brother's child. This was better than a lawsuit. This was Greek tragedy. This was biblical vengeance. I saved the document to 3 different hard drives and printed a physical copy, locking it in the safe that they had failed to crack. The party was 2 days away. I was going to let them inflate their balloons and cut their cake, and then I was going to drop this bomb right in the middle of the frosting. I turned off the monitor, plunging the room back into darkness, smiling into the void. The end was near. Friday morning arrived with a deceptive calm that masked the hurricane I was about to unleash. I walked into the kitchen, wearing a silk power suit and a smile that could have blinded a pilot. Julian was drinking coffee while scrolling through his phone, and Chantel was devouring a plate of pancakes with the enthusiasm of a woman who thought she had won the lottery. Tiffany was there too, uninvited as usual, pretending to help Mrs. Etta with the dishes, while actually just spying on my mood. They were all waiting for me to crack. They expected the stress of the week to finally break me. Instead, I clapped my hands together and announced that I had a revelation. I sat down at the head of the table and looked at each of them with wide, beaming eyes. I have been doing a lot of thinking, I said, letting my gaze linger on Julian. This week has been so emotional with the baby news and the tension. I realized that we need a fresh start. We need to show the world that the Brooks family is stronger than ever. Julian looked up wary but intrigued. "What do you mean, babe?" he asked. I reached across the table and took his hand, squeezing it with a grip that was iron-wrapped in velvet. "I want to host a party this Saturday, but not just a dinner. I want to combine a vow renewal ceremony for us with a massive gender reveal for Chantel. We will do it right here on the estate. Black tie, champagne, the works." The room went silent for a heartbeat before erupting. Tiffany shrieked with delight, dropping the dish towel. "A double celebration," she squealed. "That is genius, Simone. Think of the Instagram content." Mama Lucille, who had just waddled in, thumped her cane in approval. "Now that is the spirit I have been praying for," she declared. "A public display of unity. That is exactly what this family needs to silence the gossips." I smiled, feeding off their greed. "But I am not doing this halfway," I continued, pulling out my tablet. "I have already drafted the guest list. I am inviting the mayor, the partners from my firm, and Tiffany. I am inviting Mr. Henderson and the entire executive board from Sovereign Bank. I want them to see what a supportive family you have." Tiffany preened unknowingly, signing her own death warrant. "And Julian, I invited the entire coaching staff and your old teammates. Let us show them you are still the king of this city." Julian puffed out his chest, his ego instantly inflated. He saw this as my total submission. He thought I was spending my money to rehabilitate his image and celebrate his bastard child. He had no idea I was actually assembling a jury. I needed witnesses. I needed the most powerful people in Atlanta to see the DNA results and the bank fraud evidence with their own eyes. I needed to make sure that when they fell, there would be no dark corner for them to hide in. I spent the rest of the day in a frenzy of planning. I hired the best caterers, the most expensive florists, and a massive LED screen rental company. When the technician asked me what media I would be displaying on the giant screen during the party, I handed him a USB drive with a calm smile. "Just a little home movie," I said. A tribute to honesty. As I watched the tent trucks pull into the driveway, I felt a deep, terrifying sense of peace. The stage was set, the players were in place, and tomorrow night the curtain would fall on their lies forever. Saturday night arrived, transforming my estate into a fortress of light and excess. I had spared no expense to ensure that the stage for their execution was as magnificent as possible. The driveway was lined with a fleet of valet attendants parking Bentleys and Rolls-Royces, while the sprawling garden was tented in white silk, illuminated by thousands of fairy lights that mirrored the stars above. It was the kind of event that would grace the social pages of every magazine in Georgia tomorrow morning, though not for the reasons my guests expected. The air smelled of expensive perfume-grilled lobster and the distinct metallic scent of impending doom. I stood on the balcony for a moment, watching the arrival of the Atlanta elite. I saw the mayor shaking hands with the partners from my venture capital firm. I saw Mr. Henderson and the entire executive board of Sovereign Bank sipping my vintage champagne and admiring the architecture. They were all unwitting witnesses summoned to testify to the destruction of a reputation. Down on the lawn, the guests of honor were performing their roles with nauseating perfection. Tiffany and Chantel had decided to dress in matching pastel pink gowns, looking like two bridesmaids at a funeral they did not know was their own. They stood near the towering chocolate fountain holding court and giggling behind their manicured hands. Tiffany was beaming, introducing Chantel to the bank executives as her miracle sister and the mother of the future Brooks heir. She looked triumphant, thinking she had successfully integrated her scheme into high society. Chantel rubbed her belly constantly, a prop in their performance, soaking up the attention of women who would shun her the moment the truth came out. They looked so comfortable, so secure in the lie that they had forgotten who actually owned the ground they were standing on. Julian was working the room like a politician in the final days of a campaign. He wore a tuxedo that I had bought him, drinking scotch that I had paid for, boasting about a business acumen he did not possess. He had his arm around his old football teammates, laughing loudly and playing the role of the benevolent patriarch. He looked at me across the crowd, every few minutes, his eyes gleaming with a mixture of arrogance and relief. He thought I had rolled over. He thought the party was my white flag, my public submission to his new family dynamic. He raised his glass to me in a silent toast, a gesture of mockery that made my pulse steady rather than race. I did not blend in with the pastel theme. I had chosen my outfit with the precision of a warrior choosing armor. I wore a floor-length gown of crimson silk, a shade of red so deep and vibrant it looked like fresh blood against the sea of black tuxedos. It was the color of power, of warning, and of victory. I moved through the crowd, accepting compliments and congratulations with a serene smile. "You look stunning, Simone," they said. "You must be so happy to be expanding the family." I thanked them, my voice smooth as glass. I was happy. I was deliriously happy. Because I knew that the giant LED screen dominating the stage behind the jazz band was not just there to show baby photos. It was a guillotine blade waiting to drop, and I was the one holding the rope. The jazz quartet faded into a soft, lingering melody as I stepped onto the raised platform. The chatter of 300 guests died down instantly, replaced by the polite clinking of crystal flutes and the rustle of evening gowns. I stood alone under the spotlight, the crimson silk of my dress catching the stage lights, making me look like a flame flickering in the dark. I adjusted the microphone stand and looked out at the sea of expectant faces. The mayor was there. The partners from my firm were there. The entire social hierarchy of Atlanta was gathered on my lawn, waiting for me to speak. I found Julian in the front row. He was sitting between his mother and Chantel, looking up at me with an expression of smug adoration. He thought this was his coronation. He thought I was about to publicly validate his ego and accept his mistress into the fold. I cleared my throat and let a soft, affectionate smile touch my lips. "Thank you all for joining us tonight. It means the world to me to see so many friends and colleagues gathered here to celebrate love and family. 10 years ago, I stood before many of you and promised to love this man through sickness and health, through poverty and wealth. We have navigated the stormy seas of business and the quiet challenges of private life. People often ask me what the secret to a lasting marriage is. I always tell them it is transparency. It is knowing that your partner is the one person in the world who sees you for who you truly are." I paused to let the words sink in. I saw Julian reach out and take Chantel's hand, giving it a squeeze. He looked so proud, so assured of his victory. I turned my gaze to the front table, addressing his family directly. "And to the Brooks family, thank you for welcoming me. Mama Lucille, your prayers have always been a guiding force in this home. You have always reminded me of the importance of bloodlines and legacy. And Tiffany, my dear sister-in-law, your ambition and your drive to protect the family name have been truly inspiring to watch this past week." Tiffany preened, smoothing the skirt of her pink dress. She whispered something to the bank executive next to her, likely boasting about her connection to me. I looked back at Julian. "And to my husband. You have taught me so much about resilience. You have shown me that love is not just about words, it is about action. It is about what we do when we think no one is watching." Julian stood up, then raising his glass to me. His eyes were glistening with unshed tears. He was performing the role of the humbled, grateful husband perfectly. He dabbed at the corner of his eye with a silk handkerchief, sniffing loudly enough for the people at the next table to hear. He truly believed that I was capitulating. He believed that my speech was a surrender. I smiled wider, my heart beating with the steady rhythm of a ticking clock. I wanted to honor that honesty tonight. I wanted to give you all a glimpse into the heart of this family. I have prepared a short video tribute, a collection of moments that capture the true essence of Julian Brooks and the love that binds this family together. So please turn your attention to the screen behind me. Let us watch the truth unfold together. I stepped back from the microphone as the lights dimmed, plunging the garden into darkness. The giant LED screen flickered to life. Julian sat back down, a satisfied grin on his face, ready to watch a montage of our vacations and his football highlights. He had no idea he was staring into the barrel of a loaded gun. The garden was plunged into a heavy, expectant darkness, broken only by the hum of the massive projector. For a few seconds, the silence was absolute. 300 guests held their breath, anticipating a tearful montage of wedding photos and romantic vacations set to a sentimental ballad. I stood to the side of the stage, my hands clasped loosely in front of me, watching Julian in the front row. He was leaning back in his chair, his arm draped expansively over the backrest, a portrait of relaxed arrogance. He whispered something to Chantel, likely a joke about how well he had trained me. He was smiling at the blank screen, waiting to see his own face reflect his glory back at him. Then, the LED wall flickered to life. It was not a soft focus image of our vow renewal. It was a stark, high-definition wide-angle shot of my living room, time-stamped just 5 days ago. The clarity was unforgiving. The audience gasped collectively, a sound that sucked the air out of the tent. On the screen, 50 feet high, Julian was not looking at me with love. He was pouring my vintage wine into 2 glasses and handing one to Chantel, who was wearing nothing but my silk robe. The intimacy was undeniable, but it was the audio that truly weaponized the moment. The speakers, rigged to concert-quality standards, boomed Julian's voice across the estate, ensuring that not a single syllable was lost to the wind. To Simone, he sneered on the screen, raising his glass in a mock toast. "May she stay blind and busy making us rich." The crowd murmured, a ripple of shock moving through the tables, but the video was not done. On screen, Chantel giggled and hopped onto the counter. "What about your mom?" she asked. "Is she going to be a problem when we move in?" Julian laughed, a cruel, dismissive sound that echoed hauntingly in the garden. "Mom is just a necessary evil," he said casually, taking a sip of wine. "She is an old bat. Honestly, I wish she would just stroke out already. Once we get the money, we can dump her in a state home and sell her house. It is falling apart anyway, just like her." In the front row, I saw Mama Lucille freeze. Her hand flew to her chest and her mouth opened in a silent scream of betrayal. But the digital Julian was not finished. He turned to the camera, unaware he was addressing his own destruction. "And do not worry about Tiffany either," he continued. "Chantel asked if we had to cut her in on the deal." Julian shook his head. "Tiffany is just a useful idiot. She is a white snake we can charm until we get the bank codes. Once the transfer clears, we cut her loose. She is too desperate to see it coming." The video paused on a freeze frame of Julian's laughing face. The silence that followed was not the silence of anticipation. It was the silence of a bomb that had just detonated and sucked all the oxygen out of the world. I looked down at the front row. Julian was no longer leaning back. He was gripping the arms of his chair so hard his knuckles were white, his face a mask of absolute horror. He looked at the screen, then at me, and realized too late that the woman in the red dress was not his wife. She was his executioner. The video froze on the grotesque image of Julian's laughing face, but the silence in the garden shattered instantly. It began with a collective gasp that sucked the air out of the tent, followed immediately by a roar of scandalized whispers that swept through the crowd like a wildfire. I watched from the stage as the veneer of high society cracked wide open. Mr. Henderson, the CEO of Sovereign Bank, recoiled from Tiffany, as if she were radioactive, physically scooting his chair away to distance himself from the woman who had just been exposed as a gullible pawn in a criminal conspiracy. The look of professional disgust on his face told me that Tiffany's career was dead before she even left the party. But the devastation in the front row was the most visceral. Mama Lucille sat paralyzed, her hand clutching her chest, her eyes wide with a horror that went beyond shock. She had spent decades worshipping Julian, sacrificing her dignity and her other children to prop up his ego. Hearing her golden child wish for her death so he could sell her home was a betrayal so profound it seemed to physically shrink her. She looked at him, not with love, but with the terrifying realization that she had raised a monster who viewed her as nothing more than an obstacle to his inheritance. Her mouth opened and closed soundlessly, the matriarch stripped of her power in a single heartbeat. Tiffany looked like she was going to be sick. The blood had drained from her face, leaving her pale and clammy in her matching pink gown. She had walked into this party believing she was the puppet master, the clever operator using a naive family to fund her lifestyle. Hearing Julian call her a useful idiot and a white snake destroyed her delusion of superiority. She looked around frantically, seeing the judgment in the eyes of the Atlanta elite, and realized there was nowhere to hide. Her social climb had ended in a free fall. Then Julian snapped. The paralysis of terror gave way to a violent, desperate rage. With a guttural roar, he launched himself out of his chair, knocking over a table of champagne flutes that shattered with a piercing crash. "It is a lie," he screamed, his voice cracking with hysteria as he scrambled toward the stage. "It is fake. Turn it off." He looked deranged, his eyes wild, charging toward the screen as if destroying the hardware could erase the truth. He bounded up the stairs, reaching for the laptop, but he never made it. Two of my personal security guardsmen I had hired specifically for this moment stepped out of the shadows. They moved with the efficiency of a steel wall. One of them, a massive man named Marcus, caught Julian mid-charge. He didn't even use a weapon. He simply placed a hand on Julian's chest and shoved. Julian flew backward, tumbling down the stairs and landing in a heap on the manicured grass at the feet of the mayor. He scrambled to get up, dirt staining his tuxedo, panting and sweating, looking up at me with pleading, desperate eyes. I stood above him, untouched and immovable in my crimson dress, looking down at the man who had tried to steal my life. I did not flinch. I did not step back. I simply signaled for the next slide. The sight of my husband sprawling in the dirt was satisfying but incomplete. The garden was silent save for the ragged breathing of Julian and the distant hum of traffic beyond the gates. The guests were frozen in a tableau of shock, their eyes darting between the man on the grass and the woman in the red dress standing like a judge on the podium. Tiffany was clutching her chest, her face a mask of terrified relief. She thought the show was over. She thought that because her face had not appeared on the video, she had escaped the guillotine. She believed her role as the mastermind was still a secret buried under layers of corporate bureaucracy. She was wrong. I raised the microphone to my lips again, my voice cutting through the heavy night air like a scalpel. "Infidelity is a moral failing," I said, looking directly at Tiffany, who flinched as if I had struck her. "But theft, fraud, and money laundering are federal crimes. And while I can divorce a cheater, I believe the FBI prefers to handle criminals themselves." I clicked the remote in my hand. The image of Julian's laughing face vanished from the massive LED screen, replaced instantly by a complex web of spreadsheets and scanned bank documents. The bright white light of the digital evidence illuminated the garden, casting harsh shadows on the faces of the social elite. "These are not wedding vows," I announced, walking to the edge of the stage. "These are the internal transaction logs from Sovereign Bank. Specifically, the accounts managed by Senior Relationship Manager Tiffany Brooks." I pointed to the screen where rows of highlighted transactions were scrolling. "You will notice a pattern of deposits into a dormant consulting firm registered to my husband. $9,000 here, $9,500 there, always just under the $10,000 reporting threshold. In the banking world, we call this structuring. It is a technique used to wash illegal funds without triggering a federal alert." I heard a chair scrape violently against the stone patio. In the VIP section, Mr. Henderson, the CEO of Sovereign Bank, was standing up. His face was a mixture of purple rage and professional panic. He was staring at the screen, recognizing the proprietary interface of his own bank's software. He saw the timestamps. He saw the authorization codes. And most importantly, he saw the employee ID attached to every single illegal transfer. I turned to him, offering a grim, apologetic smile. "Mr. Henderson, I apologize for turning a celebration into an internal audit. But as you can see, your employee has been using my husband's shell company to launder money for a syndicate in East Atlanta. She authorized these overrides herself. She bypassed the compliance software. She thought she was clever enough to hide behind a former athlete's name." Tiffany let out a strangled cry. "That is not true!" she shrieked, her voice thin and hysterical. "You faked those! You hacked the system!" She looked around desperately, seeking an ally, but finding only a sea of disgusted faces. Mr. Henderson looked at her with the cold detachment of a man calculating his liability insurance. "Tiffany Brooks," he boomed, his voice shaking with anger, "do not say another word. You are suspended, effective immediately, pending a federal investigation." I watched Tiffany crumble. Her knees gave way and she collapsed onto the grass in a puddle of pink tulle. She had come here tonight to solidify her social standing, to rub her victory in my face. Instead, she had lost her career, her reputation, and her freedom in the span of 30 seconds. But I was not done. I had one more slide to show. One more biological bomb to drop that would ensure this family never recovered. The financial audit was over, but the family reunion was just beginning. I turned my back on the weeping form of my sister-in-law and the disgraced figure of the bank CEO, shifting my attention to the girl in the pink dress who was currently trying to make herself invisible behind the chocolate fountain. Chantel was shaking so hard that the fabric of her gown vibrated. She knew what was coming. She knew that I knew. But the crowd did not, and I was determined to give them the show they had been promised. I tapped the microphone one last time, drawing the gaze of every stunned guest back to the stage. "We still have one more piece of business to attend to," I said, my voice surprisingly light, almost cheerful. "We promised you a gender reveal. We promised to welcome the next generation of the Brooks dynasty. And I am a woman of my word." I gestured to the screen behind me. The spreadsheets vanished, replaced instantly by a swirling animation of blue confetti. "It is a boy," I announced, clapping my hands together slowly. "A son. The heir that Mama Lucille has been praying for on her knees every Sunday." Mama Lucille looked up from her chair, her eyes glassy and confused, trying to salvage a shred of hope from the wreckage. "A grandson," she whispered. "A boy." But I cut her hope off at the knees. "Yes, a boy, Lucille. But he does not belong to Julian." The blue confetti on the screen dissolved into a stark, clinical document. It was the paternity test result enlarged, so that even the guests in the back row could read the bold red text. Probability of paternity for Julian Brooks, 0%. Julian, who was still sitting in the dirt, looked at the screen and blinked. His brain seemed unable to process the information. He had preened. He had bragged. He had moved his mistress into my house, believing he was the virile king. The screen told the world he was nothing but a cuckold. But that is not the best part. I continued, my voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. If Julian is not the father, then who is? Who did Chantel feel comfortable enough to sleep with? Who else was in the family circle? I clicked the remote one final time. The screen shifted to display the second test result. The name flashed in giant black letters. Subject B, Trey Brooks. Probability of paternity 99.9%. The sound that ripped through the garden was not a gasp. It was a scream. It came from Tiffany. She had lifted her head from the grass, her mascara running down her face in black streaks, only to see her own husband's name towering over the garden. She looked across the lawn to where Trey was standing by the bar holding a beer, his face drained of all color. He looked like a deer in headlights, caught in the high beams of his own destruction. I looked down at Julian, who was staring at his brother, with a look of pure animalistic betrayal. "You slept with him?" Julian whispered, his voice trembling with rage. "You slept with my brother. You brought his baby into my house." I smiled, cold and victorious. "It seems keeping it in the family is a Brooks tradition," I said. "Chantel was not just carrying an affair partner's baby, she was carrying a nephew. Mama Lucille, you wanted a pure bloodline. You wanted the family to stay close. Well, you cannot get much closer than this. Your daughter-in-law was laundering money for your son, while your other son was sleeping with your first son's mistress. It is a perfect circle of dysfunction." I dropped the microphone. It hit the stage with a heavy final thud, signaling the end of the broadcast. The dynasty was dead. The shockwave that hit Tiffany was not one of sadness. It was pure, unadulterated rage. She scrambled up from the grass, her pink gown stained with dirt and tears, and launched herself at Trey with the ferocity of a wounded animal. She did not care about the mayor standing 10 feet away. She did not care about the police sirens wailing in the distance. She only cared about the man who had humiliated her in front of the entire city. "You slept with that trash," she screamed, her voice shredding the night air. "You got her pregnant while I was stealing money for us, you dirty, lying traitor!" She clawed at his face, drawing blood before he could even raise his hands to defend himself. Trey stumbled back, knocking over a tray of hors d'oeuvres, slipping on the polished stone as he tried to escape his wife's fury. The guests gasped and scattered, creating a wide circle around the brawl. It was a spectacle of absolute degradation. The Brooks family, known for their airs of superiority and their lectures on class, was now rolling in the dirt, tearing each other apart like jackals over a carcass. And standing in the middle of it all was Julian. He was a statue carved out of misery. He did not move to help his brother. He did not move to restrain his wife. He just stood there staring at the chaos with dead, hollow eyes. The realization was physically crushing him. He had lost his fortune. He was facing prison time. And the baby he had been strutting around, claiming as his heir, was actually his nephew's cousin. He had been played by everyone he loved. He looked at Chantel, who was cowering behind a waiter, and for the first time I saw true hatred in his eyes. Then came the sound that stopped the fight. It was a low, gurgling gasp from Mama Lucille. She was clutching the edge of the table, her knuckles white as bone. Her face had turned a terrifying shade of gray, and sweat was pouring down her forehead. "Stop!" she wheezed, her voice barely audible over Tiffany's screaming. "Please stop!" She took a staggering step forward, trying to reach her sons, trying to pull her shattered family back together, but her heart finally gave out under the weight of the truth. Her eyes rolled back in her head, and she collapsed. She hit the ground with a heavy, sickening thud that silenced the garden instantly. This was not one of her dramatic fainting spells designed to guilt-trip me into submission. This was the real thing. Her body convulsed once, and then went still. Trey shoved Tiffany off him and scrambled toward his mother, shouting for help. "Someone call 911, he yelled, his voice cracking with panic. "Mom! Mom, wake up!" I stood on the stage watching the tableau from my elevated vantage point. I did not rush down. I did not offer CPR. I simply watched as the paramedics who had been stationed at the perimeter for the party pushed through the crowd. I saw them rip open her expensive dress to attach the defibrillator pads. I saw Julian drop to his knees, burying his face in his hands, sobbing not for his mother, but for the total annihilation of his life. The flashing red and blue lights of the ambulance reflected off the sequins of my dress. I had not laid a hand on any of them. I had simply turned on the lights and let them destroy themselves. As the paramedics loaded Lucille onto the stretcher, I turned and walked off the stage. The show was over. The wail of the ambulance carrying Mama Lucille had barely faded into the night when a new, more aggressive sound cut through the heavy, humid air. It was not the rhythmic pulse of emergency medical services, but the sharp, chirping sirens of federal law enforcement. Tires screeched against the asphalt of my long, winding driveway as a convoy of black SUVs swarmed the estate, their blue and red lights painting the manicured trees in strokes of violence. The remaining guests, already traumatized by the brawl and the heart attack, froze in place. This was not a noise complaint. This was a raid. Doors flew open in perfect synchronization, and agents wearing navy blue windbreakers, emblazoned with the yellow letters FBI, poured onto the lawn. They moved with a tactical precision that contrasted sharply with the chaotic sobbing of the Brooks family. They did not ask for directions. They knew exactly who they were looking for, thanks to the detailed dossier I had couriered to the Atlanta field office 48 hours ago. 2 agents made a beeline for Tiffany, who was trying to wipe the blood from her lip, looking around like a trapped rat seeking a sewer grate. Tiffany Brooks, an agent, barked, his voice booming over the commotion. "You are under arrest for wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, and conspiracy to commit money laundering. Put your hands behind your back." Tiffany shrieked, a high-pitched sound of pure denial. No, you have the wrong person. It was him. She pointed a trembling finger at Julian. It is his company. I just work at the bank. I was just following orders. The agents were unmoved. They spun her around, forcing her wrists together. The cold, metallic click of the handcuffs was the loudest sound in the garden. She looked toward Mr. Henderson, pleading with her eyes for him to intervene to tell them she was a top performer. Instead, he turned his back on her, pulling out his phone to call his legal team to distance the bank from her radioactive fallout. Julian, still sitting in the dirt in his ruined tuxedo, looked up as a second team of agents approached him. He scrambled to his feet, holding his hands up in a gesture of surrender. I did not do anything, he stammered, his eyes darting between the agents and me. I am the victim here. She stole from me. My wife set me up. The lead agent stepped forward, holding a warrant. You are listed as the sole proprietor of Apex Consulting, Mr. Brooks. Millions of dollars of illicit funds moved through accounts signed by you. You are being detained for questioning regarding your role in a racketeering enterprise. We suggest you call a lawyer. They did not cuff him immediately, but they flanked him, gripping his arms with a force that made it clear he had no choice. I stood on the terrace, sipping the last of my champagne, watching the finale of my orchestration. One of the agents looked up and gave me a curt, professional nod. I returned it. I had handed them a career-making case on a silver platter. As they marched Julian toward the waiting SUVs, he looked back at me. His face was a mask of confusion and terror. He finally realized that the woman he had underestimated, the woman he had called cold and barren, had just burned his entire world to the ground without striking a single match. I turned and walked back inside the silent, empty house. The trash had been taken out. The strobe lights of the ambulance painted the garden in a nauseating rhythm of red and white. It was the disco beat of a tragedy. I watched the paramedics hoist the stretcher, their faces set in grim determination. Mama Lucille was strapped down, an oxygen mask clamping her face, her chest heaving with the desperate, rattling breaths of a woman whose heart was literally breaking under the weight of her own sins. She looked small and frail, stripped of the arrogance that had been her armor for the last 5 years. The guests were watching in a hushed reverence, thinking they were witnessing a daughter-in-law saying a tearful goodbye to the matriarch. They were wrong. I was not there to offer comfort. I was there to twist the knife one last time. I stepped up to the gurney, raising a hand to stop the paramedic who was about to load her into the back. Please, I said, my voice trembling with a fabricated sorrow that would have won me an Academy Award. I just need 1 second. I need to tell her I love her before you take her. The young EMT nodded sympathetically and stepped back, giving me a moment of privacy amidst the chaos. I leaned down close, my face inches from hers. Her eyes were open wide and terrified, darting frantically between me and the flashing lights. She could not speak, but I could see the question burning in her gaze. She wanted to know why. She wanted to know how I could be so cruel. I brushed a stray lock of gray hair from her sweating forehead, a gesture that looked tender to the onlookers, but felt cold to her. I moved my lips right against her ear, bypassing the plastic strap of the oxygen mask, ensuring that only she could hear the venom I was about to spit. You got exactly what you prayed for, Lucille? I whispered, my voice smooth and toxic like mercury. You spent years begging God for a grandson. You tormented me for being barren. You wanted a male heir to carry on the Brooks name, no matter the cost. Well, look at God's work. You have him now. I paused, letting the reality sink into her fading consciousness. But he is not from your golden child, Julian. He is from Trey, the disappointment, the son you ignored. And he is from Chantel, the girl you tried to replace me with. And the best part is that it was Tiffany, your precious, perfect white daughter-in-law, who made it all happen. She brought the snake into the garden. She helped destroy your favorite son. You traded me the woman who paid for your pacemaker and your lifestyle for a criminal and an adulterer. Her heart monitor began to beep faster, a frantic digital rhythm that signaled a fresh wave of panic. Her eyes bulged, staring at me with a hatred so pure it could have started a fire. She tried to lift her hand to claw at me, but the straps held her down. I smiled a small, sad smile for the audience behind me. "Congratulations, Mama," I whispered finality in every syllable. "You finally have a house full of babies and drama. I hope it keeps you warm in the state nursing home, because I am selling the house on Monday." I pulled back, standing tall, and looked at the paramedic. "She is ready to go now," I said softly, wiping a non-existent tear from my cheek. "Take good care of her." I watched the heavy doors slam shut, sealing her in with the truth that would haunt her remaining days. The siren wailed as they sped away, a funeral dirge for a matriarch who bet on the wrong horse. I took a deep breath of the night air. It tasted like ozone and absolute victory. The sun was just beginning to bleed over the horizon, casting a pale gray light over the debris of the previous night's festivities. The garden was silent, save for the rustling of the uncollected garbage bags and the deflated balloons that bobbed listlessly in the breeze. I stood on the master bedroom balcony, wrapping my silk robe tighter against the morning chill, holding a steaming mug of coffee. I was not waiting for a sunrise. I was waiting for the final act of the cleanup crew. A yellow taxicab, an eyesore against the pristine landscaping, pulled up to the front gate. It idled for a moment, before the back door opened and Julian stepped out. He looked like a man who had been chewed up by the federal justice system and spat out onto the curb. His tuxedo was torn and stained with grass and dirt. His tie was missing. His face was unshaven and haggard, his eyes red-rimmed from hours of interrogation under fluorescent lights. He did not have his wallet or his phone, which the FBI had seized as evidence, so he had to argue with the driver for a moment, likely promising a payment he could no longer make before the cab sped off, leaving him stranded. He turned toward the house, his shoulders slumped, expecting to punch in the gate code and slink back into his sanctuary to lick his wounds, but the code did not work. I watched him punch the numbers into the keypad frantically, his frustration mounting with every error beep. He tried again and again. Then he looked down and saw what was waiting for him. I had instructed security to pile his belongings right there on the asphalt. It was not his entire wardrobe, just the essentials packed into 3 Louis Vuitton duffel bags. His golf clubs were leaning against the stone pillar. It was a pathetic little shrine to a life that no longer existed. He kicked one of the bags in a fit of impotent rage, then looked up and saw me standing on the balcony. "Simone," he shouted, his voice cracking with exhaustion and desperation. "Open the gate. This isn't funny. The feds let me go. I need a shower and I need my lawyer. Let me in." I took a slow, deliberate sip of my coffee, looking down at him like he was a solicitor trying to sell me something I did not want. "You do not live here anymore, Julian," I called down, my voice carrying clearly in the morning stillness. "This property is solely in my name. And since you are currently a person of interest in a federal money laundering investigation, allowing you inside would make me an accessory. I have a reputation to protect." He grabbed the iron bars of the gate, shaking them like a prisoner realizing his sentence had just begun. "You cannot do this," he screamed, tears finally spilling over. "I am your husband. We can fix this. I was manipulated, Simone. Tiffany tricked me. I love you. Please do not leave me out here." I set my coffee cup down on the railing and picked up the thick manila envelope that had been resting on the table. I did not feel anger. I did not feel sadness. I felt lighter than air. "I did not manipulate you, Julian," I said calmly. "I just let you be yourself. And that was enough to destroy you." I held the envelope over the edge of the balcony. "Inside are the divorce papers," I continued. "I signed them 3 days ago. My lawyers have already filed for an emergency freezing of our shared assets to protect me from your criminal liability. You have nothing, Julian. No house, no trust fund, no wife. And since your brother is the father of your baby, I guess you have no son either." I let go of the envelope. It fluttered down through the air, flipping over and over in the wind before landing in the dirt at his feet. It lay there white and stark against the asphalt. Julian stared at it, his hands sliding slowly down the bars of the gate until he was kneeling on the ground. He looked small. He looked finished. I did not wait for him to pick it up. I did not wait for his next excuse. I turned my back on him and walked back into my bedroom, closing the glass doors behind me. I drew the blackout curtains, shutting out the sight of him and the rising sun. I was going to sleep for a week. When I woke up, I would be single, rich, and free. The game was over, and I had won. 3 months is a lifetime in the corporate world. In 90 days, markets can crash, empires can rise, and as I discovered, entire families can be erased from the social register. I sat in my newly renovated home office, which used to be Julian's man cave, sipping an espresso and reviewing the final update from my private investigator. It was a dossier of ruin, a catalogue of consequences that I had set in motion with a single slideshow. I did not feel pity as I flipped through the pages. I felt the cool clinical satisfaction of an accountant balancing a ledger. The first photo was of Tiffany. She was no longer wearing pastel pink or sneering at my appetizers. The image showed her being led out of a federal courthouse in an orange jumpsuit, her wrists shackled to her waist. The judge had denied bail, citing her access to offshore accounts and flight risk. The woman who had terrorized me for 5 years was now known as inmate 78402. She was facing 20 years for wire fraud and money laundering. There were no spa days in federal holding. There was only a stainless steel toilet, and the crushing realization that she was not the smartest person in the room. She was just the most arrogant. I turned the page to Trey, the virile father of the so-called heir. The scandal had made him radioactive in Atlanta. His construction firm fired him the morning after the party to save their own reputation. Tiffany had served him divorce papers from her jail cell, a final act of spite. Now he was unemployed, sleeping on a friend's couch in a basement apartment, drowning his sorrows in cheap beer. He had lost his wife, his brother, and his dignity, all for a fling with a woman he could not afford. Speaking of Chantel, her fall was perhaps the most visual. The investigator had snapped a photo of her in her hometown, a rural dust trap 3 hours south of the city. She was not lounging in silk robes anymore. She was wearing a polyester uniform and a visor, handing a greasy paper bag through a drive-through window. She looked exhausted, her pregnancy swollen and heavy, her face shiny with sweat and fryer grease. The golden ticket she thought she was carrying turned out to be a one-way trip back to the poverty she tried to scam her way out of. She would raise that baby on minimum wage, far away from the trust funds and private schools she had dreamed of. But the final entry was the one that lingered. Mama Lucille. She had survived the heart attack, unfortunately for her. Death would have been a mercy compared to her new reality. The bank had foreclosed on her house immediately after Julian's assets were frozen. She was now living in a damp one-bedroom walk-up on the outskirts of town, a neighborhood where the police sirens were a lullaby. She was alone. Julian refused to speak to her. Trey was too broke to help her. Tiffany was in a cage. Lucille spent her days staring at peeling wallpaper, surrounded by boxes of knickknacks that no longer had a shelf to sit on. The dynasty she wanted so desperately was gone. She was the queen of nothing, ruling over a kingdom of dust. I closed the file and dropped it into the shredder. The noise of the paper being sliced into confetti was the only sound in my peaceful, empty house. It was time to get back to work. My phone buzzed against the marble countertop of my new penthouse kitchen, a persistent, angry vibration that disrupted the jazz playing softly in the background. I glanced at the screen. It was an unsaved number, the fourth one this week. I usually let them go to voicemail, filtering out the noise of the past, but something about this specific time, a Tuesday afternoon when the rest of the world was busy working, made me curious. I tapped the speaker button and set the phone down, returning to chopping vegetables for a salad I would actually get to eat in peace. The voice that filled the room was unrecognizable at first, stripped of its usual arrogance and bravado. It was wet, thick with tears, and trembling with a pathetic desperation. "Simone, please," Julian sobbed, the sound of his misery echoing off my high ceilings. "Please do not hang up. I know I am blocked on your main line. I borrowed a phone from the front office. I just need to hear your voice. I just need you to know how sorry I am. I stopped chopping the knife, hovering over a cucumber. In the background of the call, I could hear the distinct, chaotic screeching of children and the sharp, piercing trill of a whistle. The acoustic landscape was unmistakable. It was a gymnasium. My high-flying consultant husband, who once turned his nose up at anything less than a C-suite title, was calling me from his break time at an elementary school. The rumors were true. After the scandal made him unemployable in the corporate sector, and with his assets frozen or seized to pay legal fees, Julian had been forced to take the only job that would have him. He was a junior varsity gym teacher at a public school in the suburbs, earning barely enough to cover the rent on his studio apartment. "I miss you, Simone," he continued, his voice cracking. "I miss us. I miss the way you smelled. I miss our Sunday mornings. I am living in hell here. These kids do not respect me. The pay is garbage. I am eating ramen, Simone." Me, Julian Brooks. I made a mistake. A terrible mistake. But I paid for it. Haven't I paid enough? Can't we just meet for coffee? Just 5 minutes. I know you still love me. You can't just turn off 5 years of marriage like a light switch. I listened to him rewrite history one last time. He did not miss me. He missed the heated floors in the bathroom. He missed the black card with the unlimited limit. He missed the way I fixed his problems and polished his ego. He was not crying because he had lost his wife. He was crying because he had lost his sponsor. He was a parasite reacting to the loss of its host, nothing more. The man who had mocked my fertility and plotted to steal my fortune was now begging for a crumb of the lifestyle he had tried to burn down. I wiped my hands on a towel and picked up the phone. I did not say a word. I did not give him the satisfaction of hearing my anger or my pity. I simply pressed the red icon to end the call, cutting off his whining mid-sentence. Then I went into the settings. I added the number to the block list right next to his mother's and his brother's. A notification popped up asking to confirm. I tapped yes without a millisecond of hesitation. The silence that rushed back into the kitchen was heavy and sweet. I picked up my knife and continued chopping. Julian was a ghost story I was done telling. He belonged to the past, to the gym mats and the regrets. I had a future to build, and there was no room in it for dead weight. The auctioneer's gavel struck the podium with a finality that echoed through the quiet hall. Sold to bidder number 42. I lowered my paddle and took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment settle in my chest. I had just purchased the sprawling estate that once belonged to Julian's parents, the very place where I had endured years of snide comments, cold shoulders, and the suffocating feeling of never being good enough. They had lost it to the bank 3 months ago, after Julian's legal fees and their own mismanagement drained their accounts dry. Now the deed was in my name. I drove to the property an hour later. The grass was overgrown and the windows were dusty, a stark contrast to the manicured perfection Mrs. Vance had always prized above all else. As I stepped out of my car, I saw a battered sedan parked near the garage. Julian's parents were there, loading the last of their boxes into the trunk. They froze when they saw me walking up the driveway, the gravel crunching beneath my heels. His mother looked older, her face lined with bitterness and defeat. She straightened up, trying to summon her old haughtiness, but it fell flat against the reality of her situation. She asked what I was doing there and told me to leave them alone. I stopped a few feet away and adjusted my sunglasses. I told her I had every right to be there because I was the new owner. Her face went pale. She accused me of buying the house just to spite them, claiming I only wanted to live in her home to rub my success in their faces. She said I was vindictive. I looked at the house that had been a prison of judgment for me and shook my head. I told her she was wrong. I had no intention of living there. The energy in those walls was too heavy, too toxic. I had a different purpose in mind. I signaled to the truck that had just pulled up to the curb. 2 contractors stepped out carrying rolls of blueprints and measuring tape. I turned back to Julian's parents and told them the truth. This house was going to be gutted. The walls that held their secrets would be torn down. I was converting the estate into the Phoenix Center, a transitional sanctuary for women and children escaping domestic abuse and toxic family environments. The silence that followed was absolute. I explained that the guest wing where they used to isolate me during holidays would become a counseling center. The grand dining room where they mocked my background would become a communal kitchen where women could rebuild their confidence. The house that had been a symbol of their exclusion would now be a beacon of safety for those who had none. Julian's father slammed the trunk of their sedan, unable to look at me. His mother stood trembling, tears of rage and humiliation streaming down her face. She told me I was destroying their legacy. I replied that I was correcting it. Their legacy of cruelty ended today. From now on, this address would stand for compassion, support, and the kind of family that is built on love rather than blood. They got into their car and drove away without another word, disappearing down the street and out of my life for good. I turned to the contractor and handed him the keys. I told him to get started immediately. As the first hammer struck the wood, I didn't feel triumph or malice. I felt a profound sense of peace. I had taken the site of my pain and transformed it into a source of power, not just for myself, but for every woman who would walk through those doors looking for a new beginning. The cycle was broken. My empire was built on healing, and that was the sweetest victory of all. The turbine engines of the Gulfstream G650 hummed a low, steady rhythm that vibrated gently through the soles of my shoes. I adjusted my position in the cream-colored leather seat and looked out the oval window. The sprawling city of Los Angeles was rapidly shrinking beneath us, turning into a grid of glittering lights and miniature structures. Somewhere down there, amidst the concrete and traffic, was the shell of my former life. The house that was being gutted, the people who had tried to break me, the memories that no longer held the power to hurt. They were all becoming insignificant specks in the rearview mirror of my existence. Across the aisle, Etta was already settling in for the long flight to Paris. She looked regal in a silk emerald blouse, her silver hair pulled back in an elegant bun. She caught my eye and smiled, a knowing expression that communicated more than words ever could. She had been there when I was scrubbing floors on my hands and knees. She had been there when I was crying over unpaid bills. And now she was here as we ascended toward the stratosphere, leaving the atmosphere of toxicity far behind. A flight attendant appeared silently at my elbow, placing a chilled bottle of Krug Clos d'Ambonnet on the walnut table between us. I watched the condensation bead on the glass, feeling a profound sense of lightness in my chest. For the first time in 10 years, my phone was silent. There were no frantic texts from lawyers, no manipulative voicemails from Julian, and no summons to family courts. The silence was not empty. It was full of promise. Etta reached over and poured the golden liquid into 2 crystal flutes. The bubbles danced to the surface, lively and bright. We were heading to Paris, not just for a vacation, but to scout locations for the European branch of my design firm. The world had opened up in ways I never imagined possible when I was trapped in that small, suffocating kitchen, listening to Mrs. Vance list my failures. I picked up the glass and swirled the champagne, watching the light catch the liquid. The journey had been brutal. I had walked through fire to get to this seat, but the scars I carried were no longer wounds. They were proof of survival, proof that I was stronger than their hatred and smarter than their greed. Etta raised her glass, her eyes twinkling with mischief and pride. "To new beginnings," she said softly, "and to the end of an era." I touched the rim of my glass to hers, the crystal singing a clear, sharp note that cut through the cabin. I took a sip, the crisp taste of victory washing over me. I looked back out the window at the clouds now blanketing the world below, blocking out everything ugly and small. A smile tugged at the corners of my lips, genuine and unburdened. "Life is beautiful when the trash has been taken out," I said. I leaned back and closed my eyes as the jet angled higher toward the sun, ready to embrace a future that was finally entirely mine. The screen faded to black, leaving only the sound of the engines carrying us toward freedom. Simone's journey teaches us that the most lethal form of revenge is not aggression, but absolute, undeniable success. For years, she allowed her value to be defined by people who needed her to be small so they could feel big. However, the moment she stopped seeking their validation was the moment she became untouchable. The true power of this story lies in the transformation of pain into purpose. Simone didn't just take the house to be petty. She repurposed the very site of her trauma into a sanctuary for healing. This proves that we are not prisoners of our past. We have the agency to take the ugliest chapters of our lives and rewrite them into a legacy of compassion and strength. Ultimately, we learn that family is not defined by DNA, but by loyalty. While blood relations may feel entitled to your time and resources, real family is chosen. It's the people like Etta who stand by you when you have nothing and cheer the loudest when you win. The best response to disrespect isn't an argument. It's a life so well lived that the noise of your critics can no longer reach you. If Simone's victory inspired you to take back your power, hit that subscribe button and share this story with someone who needs to know that their best days are still ahead. Have you ever had to cut off toxic family members to find your own peace? Tell us your story in the comments below. We'd love to hear how you chose yourself.